Hey everyone, it's Mike coming in from Cavill again. As you know, we're trying to do as many videos as we can to go through the current crisis and give you guys as much information as we can as that information becomes available, so that you can start to apply that straight away into your business and for your staff, and to give some clarity at this moment in time in the kind of wilderness that we find ourselves in. And as per normal, the government, as great as they are, have obviously released further updates giving further clarity around the job retention scheme for everybody, basically, you know, late at night on Friday. So it's their Saturday morning for everybody to wake up to and have a look at. So if you haven't had a chance to have a look at these updates so far, I will try and put a link into this video below, if I can put the finger in there, and you can go and have a look at these updates for yourself. As per normal, all the advice and support that we give is based on the advice that the government are giving. So we take away all the other background noise of stuff that could be wildly inaccurate and not correct, and focus only on what the government have applied. Although, as you will find through some of this, some of the advice that's been given, and we've already been given to clients from questions we receive, is primarily based on what we would think would be the common sense and the way the government were going with this particular scheme. And thankfully, what has actually come out from this is actually a lot of those points that we have been doing are actually now within this update, and the government is confirming that is the actual case. So guys, this is going to be as quick as I can make it, but this gets started straight away. So what is actually new? So what has come out is a couple of quite new things. Obviously, there's updates around the apprenticeships, so that's been put in there for us. We already knew stuff about reinstating employees, but that's also been added in there as well for us. The same thing with people who are shielding. So shielding employees, that's, for example, just going to move myself here for a minute, but shielding employees are those that have been written to and told that they need to be able to stay indoors for 3 months, or potentially you're a carer for somebody who's been told that they need to shield. Also, we've got more information there for employees with care responsibilities. So that's not just people who are looking after people who are shielding, or people who have, you know, like elderly relatives, for example, but it's also for your children. So for those of us that have kids that have been sent home from school, this would apply to those employees as well. There's more updates as well for people who are on fixed-term contracts. That was kind of a hole initially. And then it's given a huge swathe of information around those people who are non-typical employees. So you remember we had the self-employed scheme came out. We previously had this coronavirus job retention scheme that had come out. And somewhere in the middle were a group of people that weren't employed, technically-ish, and those that weren't self-employed. And where did they feature? The kind of common, you know, sense advice would be they would be within this scheme, the job retention scheme, but this offers more clarity around that. It also gives a lot more clarity around overtime, commission, bonuses, and benefits in kind, which is really, really helpful. And there is more information on how you make your claim. So this is about details of bits and pieces you are likely to need to do so. Whew. So apprentices. So gratefully, you know, we've had more information now around the job retention scheme that applies to apprenticeships. So as we already believe that apprentices would all, you know, they were part of this, you could furlough a apprentice and you could claim the 80% of their salary through the job retention scheme, just as you normally would. The question mark with apprenticeships relied around what happens when they have to do training. So any training that an an apprentice has to do, what happens to that? Because technically, if someone's doing on training or doing any work, then they can't be furloughed for that period of time. So how does that work when you're meant to be furloughing someone for 3 weeks as a bare minimum? And what the government have come out here with is actually clarifying that if an apprentice is conducting training, then that should be paid on their normal typical wage, whether that be the Apprenticeship Minimum Wage, whether that be on the National Living Wage or National Minimum Wage, they should be paid for that. Now, the quite clear difference here is that if an apprentice is conducting training and then therefore due to be paid against their Apprenticeship Minimum Wage or any of the other stuff that's on there, well, if that is the case, then in which case that is for the employer to foot that bill. That would not become part of the furloughed process. So that payment would be on top of the furloughed payments, and that difference is the responsibility of the company to pay. Okay, so that's the quite clear difference. So if you have an apprentice and your apprentice is doing training, they will be paid their normal hourly rate for that training at the bare minimum there, the Apprenticeship Minimum Wage or Living Wage. And you, as the employer, will foot the bill for that period of time. Okay. Now, the key thing here is to just let you know that these things would have changed now. We're into April, so these things are changing. So the Apprenticeship Minimum Wage now is £4.15. And obviously that applies to anyone who's under the age of 19 or 19 and under, and also within their first year of their apprenticeship. So you could be 22 or 23, and in your first year of your apprenticeship, you would still be on the apprentice minimum wage of £4.15 per hour. Okay. Next, reinstating employees. This has been for HR professionals out there. This has probably been one of the most difficult things that's popped up, because there's a key part of the language here that people need to bear in mind. And I think this is more specifically to employees rather than employers. But this has all come through what's happened with Martin Lewis. If you know Martin Lewis, fantastic guy, knows his stuff, no shadow of a doubt. But it is giving the impression that these things will happen. And as we'll go through this, we'll see that that's not necessarily always the case. So we already knew, for example, that if a business through the coronavirus decided to lay staff off, or through the coronavirus decided to put people on unpaid leave, or they decide to do compulsory redundancies, those individuals can be reinstated and placed on being furloughed, and that will be backdated to the 1st of March, as long as they would have been employed from the 28th of February or before. Okay, so we already knew that those people could be reinstated. What this further clarifies, it goes even further. So if you had somebody who has been, made redundant, or they've stopped working for you after the 28th of February, you can reinstate them in exactly the same way, and they would be eligible under the coronavirus job retention scheme. So the big loophole with all of this is that 28th of February date, because anybody who started a new job after the 28th of February would not be eligible under the scheme, which means they will get nothing in terms of the 80% of their salary. That does not apply to them. So that's a huge gap. What this does do is it does say that the previous employer, or if they've left, they can go and be reinstated with that employer, and they would then be eligible under that scheme for 80% of the salary that they would have been receiving at that previous employer. Now, the key message here is the word could. It's not will. It's not a guarantee. It's not that previous employers should do this. It's a case that it's up to the employer to do that if they so wish to do so. And quite clearly, not every employer does. We know employers that are struggling to cover the 80% of the salary right now, and cannot wait until the coronavirus job retention scheme actually pays out towards the end of April. They're on weekly salaries and they struggle with that today, right now, from this point. So obviously to take somebody back on who'd left might just not be something that's in their consideration to actually allow and permit to do. So it's all great that Martin Lewis has said those things. It's all great that he's referred to that. The problem I have is when people hear that, it's the same as so many other messages that are coming out at the moment in time. People take it almost at gospel truth, exactly verbatim what is being said there is going to be applied by everybody. And that's not the case. This is something that is a could, and is a nice thing for employers to do, but it doesn't mean that every employer is going to be forced into that particular situation to have to do it. So more so for employees, like I said, it's a case of understanding this is something that is on the table. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. You've got to bear that in mind. That is two different things, and I don't want to mislead anybody around that. And certainly for businesses, we don't want to mislead you guys to feeling that you have to take this action and then try and cover the cost of how you bring somebody back in that you weren't actually financially forecasting for in the first instance anyway. And then we come on to shielding employees. I think this is something, again, falls under the realms of common sense would prevail as to how this would be treated, and the guidance that certainly we've been giving out to clients and individuals asking for support. It's now come into the guidance from the government, and actually I'm great that it has done that. It's certainly welcome, because I think if people are shielding, there is nothing that they could have done. They're doing what the government is telling them to do, and to shield when you're being told to do that and you're not actually on, going sick or isolating, it kind of would be a bit unfair to put somebody who's got to shield for 3 months onto SSP, which the company would only be able to qualify back for 2 weeks of, and that would be completely the wrong way to go. And what this does do is it does confirm that those who are employed by you that are being told they have to shield, because obviously they're at high risk, or those that are caring for somebody who is shielding because they are high risk, they should be eligible to be placed on furlough. So if you are furloughing your staff, again, this is all comes down to could and should and everything else. If your company is furloughing staff, and you're closing up, say for example you own a restaurant or a pub and you're closing down at the moment in time, you're placing all your staff on furlough, and you've got somebody who is shielding, they should also be part of that process. They should not be disadvantaged in any way. Potentially, remember, everything has to follow employment law. You shouldn't be indirectly or directly discriminating against anybody. And obviously, if they are shielding, or they're caring for somebody who is shielding, then potentially have a protected characteristic. So bear that in mind. The next part is actually looking at employees with care responsibilities. It's quite an interesting one, because obviously, typically what was out there before was if you are going home because you have to care for somebody, you have those care responsibilities, similar to what we were talking about earlier on with those being shielded. Or, for example, more prominently here, you are a parent and you have children who you need to care for. All of a sudden, they've all been sent home from school. Now, typically what would happen is if you are looking to care for somebody, or you are having to go home because you've got parental responsibilities, you could take a proportion of leave. You could take, carers leave, or you've got parental leave that you could take. And obviously there isn't any restriction on the amounts there, but you don't necessarily always get paid for that period of leave, which would mean realistically under that proviso, you could have parents through no fault of their own having to leave work to care for their children because their children have been sent home from school, and potentially not receiving pay for the time that they're actually caring for their children. And what this actually does is it confirms that those individuals should be placed on furlough, even though they're going home to care for their children or their relatives, and they have care responsibilities. If they're taking that form of leave, then that should be furloughed, and they would be eligible under this particular scheme. And I think, again, that's common sense, and it's a welcome kind of guidance update by the government that's been announced there as well. And again, I think fixed term contracts, probationary periods as well, I would include within this, by the way. I think it's quite good. This has been updated. I think, again, it's another area where it wasn't clear within the guidance initially, although I think, it's obviously covered. But giving this and specifying these groups of individuals specifically is really, really quite welcome, because again, it was potentially an area that was kind of a little bit vague and light on that side of information about what actually happens. And there's actually quite a unique and interesting element around this. So if you have someone who's on a fixed term contract, just to give some background, a fixed term contract is an ordinary contract of employment, but it has an end date. So it has a date when it will expire. With someone who's in normal conditions on a fixed term contract, you have a couple of options. One is obviously you extend the fixed term contract. The other is that you can alter the fixed term contract and make it permanent, or they could go into a new fixed term contract for a different role. The length of service still continues, by the way. But ultimately, you also have the option that actually maybe, the work has come to an end, or the money that funded it has come to an end. And therefore you have to cease the contract in accordance with that end date, and it would then cease. Within this, what they're specifying is anybody who has a fixed term end date, especially if it's coming up and due to end anytime relatively soon, that you as an employer can actually extend that. So these groups of people, of course, are covered under the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. but you can extend their contracts and you can renew them so that they can continue to receive their furloughed period payments. The key thing here that is actually quite unique is the fact that it's very, very clear that where the fixed term contract ends, so if you still, regardless of this advice, want to end the contract, say middle of May, if you do that and it's not renewed and it's not extended, then the claim under this scheme is no longer available. So it doesn't say that, you know, from, you know, if that cuts short the 3-week period, because we know you've got to be furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks for it to be eligible under this claim process, it doesn't mention that. It just says if it is not extended or it is not renewed, it is not eligible. So be careful around this, because quite potentially we can see quite a few people that are going and say, well, do you know what, you know, it's there at the moment, we'll extend it until the middle of May or end of May at the moment in time as things stand, and we'll be fine because it will go past that 3-week period. If you don't continue to extend, you do not renew it as it's written right now in that guidance, it would suggest that would be an eligible claim. So bear that in mind and watch that space. And then we come on to really what has been one of the most contentious areas is those who are non-employees. So the group are kind of employed, kind of not employed, not self-employed, and where do they feature in this? And the biggest question marks around this came up really when the self-employed scheme came out. So when that scheme came out, it became clear to these groups of people, potentially I don't fit into this category, and potentially I kind of do and kind of don't fit into this category for the job retention scheme. Where do I feature? What can I claim and what can I do? And this filtered around quite a few groups of individuals that typically, normally would not meet the legal definition of being an employed or in employment. So let's go through some of these areas. The key thing to remember with all of these though, however, so just to get this back into context, all of these areas, there's 2 key parameters, and you'll see these come up as we go through, and I'll point them out. There's 2 key parameters. One is they are all on the payroll. They are all PAYE. None of these are off payroll, okay? They're all on the book. The other thing is it is imperative that if someone is furloughed, the same principles apply here, that they should not be conducting work. And we'll come on to that because there's a slight deviation from it, but that is the 2 core aspects of this to remember. Okay, if you do not fall into those 2 categories, or the role that we're talking about here doesn't fall into those 2 categories, this scheme will not be eligible towards that particular post, and it may not be eligible as well for the self-employed scheme, because obviously the person would be kind of employed, not self-employed. Okay. So what we're looking at here is office holders. These are individuals that hold significant office within the company. They quite typically could be directors or sit on the committees of a business or on the board. And these will be significant roles that have the ability to make decisions and obviously be part of the decision-making process within the company. Now, these people will be operating on the PAYE. And when they are looking to, obviously they can be placed on furlough, but when they're looking to agree what those payments should be during that time, then they should agree those together with those running the PAYE system. Or in some cases, in some businesses, they have what's called a remuneration committee, which is a committee that agrees that salary. So it should be something that is agreed by the company, by a remuneration committee, and by the person that's obviously running the PAYE, and also the office holder. Now, if the office holder is a company director or a member of the LLP, and obviously they make decisions, the decision they make should be adopted formally by the business. We'll come onto this a little bit further in the next 2 elements of this actual decision. But another one of the key elements here is that what we're referring to is those people should have something formally in writing by the business that is confirming that they are furloughed. So your staff, if you remember, it's still going to follow employment law. Employment law hasn't been stopped or paused in any way, shape or form. And in that sense of things, you still need to write to those members of staff to formally inform them that they've been furloughed. If you have a clause in relation to, you know, layoffs, etc., within your contracts of employment, or if you didn't have the contracts of employment in writing, or you didn't have those particular clauses within your contracts, the individuals would need to sign to give consent and agree that. The same principles still apply here with these groups of individuals. That doesn't change either. So let's have a look at company directors. So if you're a director of a business, typically you'll be paying yourself a wage, a salary. It might not be a large salary, as we've already discussed with a couple of groups of people and clients. It may not be a significant salary. However, you are eligible to be furloughed under this process and claim the 80% of the salary that you are being paid under your PAYE system. And of course, crucially, we all know that directors have a significant boundary of responsibilities and obligations that fall within the framework of the Companies Act 2006, and they still have to fulfill these duties. This is the only kind of movement and deviation around the non-working part under being furloughed, and it is minimal. And I've got to stress that it is minimal. It is only where it is deemed absolutely necessary for that individual to conduct that work, to meet those obligations, that they can do so. Under no circumstances are they allowed or enabled to do any work that could generate any revenue or be deemed to be doing any work for the business past and beyond that kind of restriction. So realistically, the emphasis is they should still be doing zero work, be doing nothing in their business whatsoever, zero zip, only doing those things that under statutory rules they have to abide by and do that to the minimum level that is absolutely deemed required. Okay. And again, of course, they will need to have formal communication around the fact that they're being furloughed and that placed into writing. Then we come on to obviously the members of an LLP. So these members are obviously designated as employees for tax purposes, and this is where we come back to that key thing. They are salaried. They're on the PAYE system. Now, this agreement is in place for those individuals that are salaried members of the LLP, and obviously, again, they should be doing no work. It will be something that needs to be written to and agreed with the business or the board, and they should be doing no work through that period of time. But they will be entitled to the recompense under this particular scheme because they'll be eligible for that. So you'd have to calculate what that would be. And then obviously, this is a weird one. So the agency workers, this was already in there. This is nothing new. I don't think this was really contentious, although I would admit that the majority of our clients aren't actually using agency workers. So currently at the moment in time has not been the biggest area of questioning that we've received. So please, if you have any further questions on this, please let me know and I'll go into more detail. But in the grand scheme of things, what I believe has been the biggest question mark that I can see under this is those that are agency workers and employed realistically by an umbrella company. And obviously it's up to the agency, the end user, to confirm if it's okay for that person to be furloughed, because in actual fact they may still have a requirement if that person is covering a key worker type role for them to still be coming in and doing work. But if they are to be furloughed and there is that general consent there, then they would also be eligible under this particular scheme. The key thing is with the umbrella companies, which I think is where the contentious issues potentially may arise, because it's up to them if they wish to place the person on furlough. And obviously that would impact on the agency workers' potential pay that would get through the PAYE system if they've not been furloughed, and equally could raise the contentious issue if the end user is saying actually there is no work for them to do, i.e. they're not a key worker and should be furloughed. And then obviously we come on to a little known area called the LIMBY workers. So the LIMBY workers, just to put this into some context that people will actually understand, these are typically contractors. They're self-employed individuals that are working for a main business. My biggest way of giving an example of this is for those who are working on a building site with a main builder, and as part of that process, you are typically obviously working with that builder providing trade, or also perhaps maybe a hairdresser. maybe you are a hairdresser and you are typically self-employed, but you are providing that service to that hairdressing salon, not to anywhere else, then obviously potentially you will also be eligible under this scheme. Now, there is one key differentiator here. Remember, we said one of the core areas here that will not change, you will probably be on the PAYE. If you are doing your own tax through a self-assessment process, then you should be doing the self-employed income support scheme, the SEISS. So you should be doing that scheme. So if your tax is going through a self-assessment portal, then you should be doing the self-assessment, the self-employed income support scheme. If, however, obviously that's not the case, and you've not got the ability to enable another individual to come in and complete that work on your behalf, then obviously you should also be eligible under this potential scheme. Now, another area is around overtime, commissions, bonuses. Let's move my picture there, and the benefits in kind that would be applicable to people. Again, this has been kind of an area heavily scrutinized. Before, what we've been saying is absolutely you shouldn't be taking into account any commission, any bonus, or any overtime whatsoever within this process. However, what we are seeing is that any regular payments, these will be things that are contractually bound to them, around obviously any overpayments that are due for the past, any fees, compulsory commission payments, they will be able to be included within this process. Any discretionary bonus or commission or non-cash payments, they should absolutely be excluded. Now, the reference salary, so your job retention salary, it should not include other benefits provided by to the employee. So, for example, you know, the pension scheme, if someone's got a car through a benefits in kind scheme, those should not be included within this calculation. Those are on top. So you remember what we said about the other bits and pieces where it's added on. So for the apprenticeship, the training, it'll be the same thing with this. However, HMRC have agreed that the COVID-19 is a life event, which is quite significant because that would could warrant any changes to a salary sacrifice arrangement. If relevant, these may also need to be adapted and varied within the employment contract. So that means another letter of consent to actually vary those points and bits and pieces under that particular benefit in kind process. But these are also quite key updates that have been made available here too. Now, again, we still are waiting at the moment in time for the ultimate question, which is, how do I put in my claim under the coronavirus job retention scheme? When will the portal be available, and when do we have a guarantee that payments will be made? Those kind of questions are still there, and the answers are still not freely available. However, what we do have is an update as to what you as an employer will need to have in order to make your claim. So I'm not going to go through the whole list here for you, but I'll leave this up whilst I'm talking. But there's quite obviously some key things on there that you'll need. None of those really are unexpected, I wouldn't presume, and all should be readily and freely available to you. The business bank account, again, I think sometimes with this, and we've seen under some of the other schemes in terms of the rateable kind of stuff that's coming back to businesses, there's been some contentious around, you know, could you actually, what if your bank account doesn't have the same name as the name of the business on the account? Why these things occur is beyond me, but at the end of the day, I think it's best to ensure that obviously your bank account is in the name of the business, always. But at the end of the day, these are the things you are going to have available to you to make that claim. All we are now waiting for is realistically the portal, know when the portal is available, the link to be able to go on there and do it, and then actually start following that through. But I'm guessing that's something that's going to be happening throughout this month, so that payments can actually then also be made and paid to people and businesses at the end of this month too. Now, the key thing here with all of this, and it's something that is very, very important to remember, is that HMRC retain the right to retrospectively audit all aspects of your claim. You've got to get this right, is the essence to this message. So obviously they will be taking steps, they will be reviewing this, and they will be looking into this if they feel that there is anywhere where this is being abused and manipulated. So just bear that in mind. Follow this through and apply it correctly, and this be fully compliant. Again, as always on these videos, I just want to emphasize the importance, as you can see with all of this and how this is changing on a regular basis, that you as an employer, as a business, know what your next steps, what your next point of actions can be. You need to plan the same way as you will need to do a financial plan around your business about how you're going to recover and what your contingencies are given different scenarios. You need to do the same thing with your people. You need to have a contingency plan about what you are going to do around your staff, your what ifs, what when, and how to's, all to be in there, so you have a one area to go to actually be ahead of the game and take actions when different things pop up and happen. This isn't something that's going to go away straight away immediately, but it will be something that will gradually start to play out. And I think you need to know what will happen and how you're going to act given different circumstances, or if we can gradually start to come back to work and doing different bits and pieces. We need to know how we then start to formulate that and how you bring your people back. So I think it's probably going to be more of a staggered approach back to normality rather than a sudden normal at 31st of August, as many people seem to believe. And also, I think your business will need to have an approach that mirrors that is staggered for bringing people back and trying to get themselves back to normality. So hopefully normality for a business is going to take some time to reach after this. This is not going to be something that's going to be normal in 6 months for a business. It may be for a country, but not necessarily for you as an individual business. And nobody has a one size fits all. Everybody's unique. Every business is different. And what we have here is the ability to do that for you and to help you to get this put into place. The thing I must stress around this is, if I could give this for free, I would, absolutely. However, we have to cover our own costs in being able to provide this, and we literally only charge that. So that's why you can see the massive saving there from what the normal price would be, and it helps you take control of your business. Guys, if this has been helpful, if you've enjoyed this video, thank you very much. Please do me a favor, and it's a big favor and it's a big ask. I want to try and get this out there for as many people as I can, because if you can take the information we're giving out at the moment for absolutely free and apply it to your business and apply your own plan and know what you want to do, then that's fantastic. And I think the more people that can see this and understand this, the better it's going to be. And the more understanding, hopefully, we can give to everybody else, and the more help everybody is actually receiving. So please, if you found this actually helpful for you, helpful for your business, please share it on. Equally, what I'll do is make sure that we link our video around the coronavirus job retention scheme that we already did, which will be somewhere here, or here. It will be somewhere on here by now. So you can click onto that link and actually watch the rest of the video that we did around the coronavirus job retention scheme, which gives a lot more in-depth detail about all the other aspects that you may want to consider when applying the scheme, just for these minor updates and tweaks that we've just added today. Guys, thank you very much. And as always, right now, please stay home, save lives, and stay safe. Take care, everyone. All the best.